Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm Michelle Martinez, the Substance Use Recovery Services Advisory Committee Administrator. And it's great to be back after not being here for a couple months in these meetings. So good to see everybody.
Thank you, Michelle. And before we go on to roll call, just want to take a moment of reflection and silence. This is September 11th, the anniversary of the tragedy of September 11th. And so if you'll join me and just with a brief moment of silence and remembrance of all those that were impacted in our nation, we'll do that and then we'll proceed with the meeting. So please join me. Thank you all. I will turn it back to Michelle for roll call at this time.
All right, thanks, Michael. All right, beginning roll call with Michael Lager.
Present.
Member leaders. Senator Dingra. Senator Braun. Representative Davis.
Good morning.
Morning. Representative Griffey. Caleb Banta-Green.
Good morning.
Morning. Don Julian Saucier.
Good morning.
Morning. Chanel Wolf. And Alexi will be joining us a little later. Amber Daniel.
Present.
Hey, Amber, good morning. Brandy Flood.
Present.
Hey, fantastic.
Hi, Brandy. Stormy Howell.
Good morning, present.
Good morning. Chad Enright.
Good morning. I'm here.
Morning. John Hayden.
Good morning.
Morning. Sherry Candelario. James Tillett. Christine Lynch.
Good morning.
Morning. Sarah Gillard. Donnell Tanksley. Malika Lamont.
Present.
Morning, Malika. Addie Adwell.
Good morning.
Morning. Kevin Ballard.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hunter McKim.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning, Hunter. Curtis Klingenberg. All right, Representative Taylor. Representative Mossbrucker. All right, that's it for roll call. So are there any other comments or?
Sure. I'd just like to take a couple moments to formally welcome everybody. Thank you, Michelle, for the roll call. It looks like we have a well-attended meeting this morning by members, and I'm sure we have plenty of guests online as well. For those of you who have agreed to present this morning, we appreciate your participation and hopefully have a lot of questions and comments throughout the couple hours. It has been a couple months since we met, and that seems to hopefully everybody enjoyed their end of summer time and throughout the state, and hopefully get some vacations out of state. But it's great to have everybody back as well. And again, I'm really impressed by the attendance here today and look forward to a great meeting. So with that, I will not hold us up any longer. We can move along with the agenda. I'll turn it back over to, who am I going to here? Blake, I believe, for public comments. So, and one more comment. We do have our room open here as well in Cherry Street Plaza. There's a few of us here today, but if at all you ever want to come in for the meetings, you're more than welcome to do that as well. So now I'll turn it to Blake. Good morning, Blake.
All right. Good morning, Michael. Good morning, folks. We will have 10 minutes for public comment here at the beginning of the meeting. So any member of the public that would like to make a comment, please go ahead and raise your hand in the chat. and we can get started with that. All right. So Abby, I see you have your hand raised. You want to go ahead and start us off?
Awesome. Thank you so much.
you.
Hi, my name is Abby. I work for Pacific County Health and Human Services, and I would like today to make a plea to advocate for rural mental health. In Seattle, overpasses in Tacoma, Camp Hope in Spokane, which makes a lot of sense because these are the most visible examples of mental health crises and homelessness, or at least the examples that most people see. So it makes sense that we do target our interventions to help these big cities. However, when we pilot programs in King County and we see these successes and we decide to duplicate these programs across the state, we end up only serving urban areas. And the reason for this is multifaceted. First, homelessness and mental health do not look the same in rural areas. I worked in DES of housing intervention strategies for mental health. But a lot of my knowledge that I built at this position was not transferable down to where I live now. For workers in our county, oh, I'm breaking up. Oh, I'm sorry. Since outreach workers can't find shelter beds for unhoused folks, they have to get them Discover passes so they can camp at state parks, so they have somewhere to camp legally, where they have access to bathrooms and showers. And another example is like our EMTs and our paramedics and our firefighters are all volunteer. So a lot of overdose response programs are aimed and targeted at EMTs when the people who respond to overdoses in our counties are always law enforcement. Second, that these pilot programs always make assumptions of existing infrastructure. For example, the new 23-hour crisis centers, well, most likely our county will not get a 23-hour crisis center, and most likely it will be regionalized. But if it did, it would not be able to do its intended job. One of the big parts that was stressed about 23-hour crisis centers is that it's not a shelter. It's just for people in crisis. However, our county doesn't have any shelters. Most of our unhoused people live in tents or they live completely unsheltered, sleeping outside. But our county gets 78 inches of rain annually. And for comparison, Seattle gets 38 inches of rain annually. In the winter, we get gusts between 60 and 100 miles an hour. It rains sideways. It can be hard to walk against the force of the wind. And so if you live outside during this, at least for me, I would always be in crisis during this sort of weather. So these 23-hour crisis centers would just be serving the same people every single day, because rightfully so, they would just continuously be in crisis. Furthermore, how would they even get to the crisis center? Our buses run maybe 3 times a day, never past 5 p.m. And our county is over 1,000 square feet, so it's not, or square miles, so it's not super walkable. Likewise, when we have diversion programs like Recovery Navigators or even our DCRs, they complain that we don't have enough community level outpatient services to divert people to. So we have funding for diversion programs, but we don't have anywhere to divert folks to. So it ends up being kind of a circle or a useless program. And sometimes it feels like the state moves from program to program without establishing services in the rural areas. So the big counties get funding, and then before every county gets this program, they move on to the next big program. Third, that the cost burden of these programs cause them to be regionalized in rural areas. This is why I don't think we'll get a 23-hour crisis center. Most of these programs have heavy administrative burdens, so the state and the regional entities don't want to spend extra money for small counties where they aren't going to get their biggest bang for their buck. Many of our services that are regionalized are very ineffective. Our DCRs come from a county that's 2.5 hours away, and our housing authority is 1.5 hours away from our county. Our region has a PACT team that serves every county but ours because we're the smallest. And when we asked to expand those services, we were told we have too much need to be expanded, but not enough need to get our own. So we're constantly in this limbo of we have a lot of need, but not enough for them to justify the cost. And I don't have the solutions to these problems, and I think it is unfair to expect me to. Cities who develop these programs have capacity, which is something that very few rural areas have. In our department, most people have 4 or 5 FTEs making up their full-time programs. So we're all wearing a lot of hats right now. We don't have the capacity to develop new programs. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have any say in the process. I'm just saying it would be good to prioritize developing programs for our areas, especially when all these state committees only have 1 or 2 rural representatives. And if you look at what counts as rural in our state, it's super diverse. For example, in our region, we have Wahkiakum County, which has 4,000 residents, and Grays Harbor County, which has 76,000 residents, but they're both considered rural, even though they're incredibly diverse areas. I'm in Pacific County. And so I think that we have to remove profit and capitalism from the core of these services. Counties like Pacific County don't receive funding for the same services as bigger places because the state won't get their same benefit, like buck per client. And we can't do the same billable services. We can't pump it out like places in Seattle or Tacoma can. So we are not prioritized for funding. I also think technical assistance needs to be improved. Technical assistance is generally a token gesture, is what I see it as.
Looks like we lost Abby there.
Sorry, I'll submit my
We've got the Abby. We can hear you now. Appreciate that. We're over the 3 minutes, if which is fine. There's nobody in line here, but appreciate your comments. Is anything else you have to wrap it up?
No, thank you. I'll just go ahead. I'll send my comment in through to the email.
All right, you bet. But we appreciate you speaking up for Pacific County. Thank you.
Blake?
Yes.
I was just, Abby, as you send your comments in, I think at the end you were referring to technical assistance. The more specific you can be about the type of technical assistance you're looking for, or the type of TA that you would like to see improved, that would be helpful. So thank you for your comments this morning.
Thank you, Abby. Appreciate those. Okay. Any other comments from the public? Okay. All right. I don't see any right now. Give it one last call for public comment. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to the next agenda item. Michelle, you want to explain what we have going on today?
Sure.
Thank
So, yeah, as you may recall, in some of our spring meetings, we had talked about the different types of folks that you want to hear from in terms of perspectives on the intersection between community safety and substance use. And one of the groups that you wanted to hear from were people in Oregon, post Measure 110, who have an understanding of that relationship, who are working in behavioral health and at the intersection with the criminal legal system. And so we've got a couple folks to hear from today. The first is Chris Thomas from the Chris Thomas Company, and the second is Joe Pedro Fry from Greater Oregon Behavioral Health, Inc. Both of these entities are working with folks with substance use and relationships with the criminal legal system in Oregon. And so I'll let them say a bit more about what exactly they do and their thoughts on that. But first up, we've got Chris Thomas. Chris, are you on? You might be muted. I think I see you speaking. You log on and come back on. Is that log off and come back on? Okay.
So we have Joe here as well.
Oh, great. Okay. And Joe's here. Excellent. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Actually, Joe, since you're on, would you like to begin?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. So good morning. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Jo Pedro Fry, and I work for Greater Oregon Behavioral Health. I'm part of the subdivision of what we refer to as GOBI and the Oregon Center on Behavioral Health and Justice Integration. So we work on in the intersection of behavioral health and criminal justice. We provide sequential intercept mapping across the entire state. We also partner with our public safety standards and training, our entity that credentials law enforcement and first responders to form the Center of Excellence and Crisis Intervention teams. So we work in a lot of different capacities as far as opportunities for the intersection for behavioral health and justice integration. And I'm sorry, Michelle, is there anything specifically you wanted me to do in introducing the entity or my role?
I think that's fine. Whatever you want to share. There will be time. There will be time after each person shares their thoughts for Q&A. So if the committee or other people in attendance have specific questions, we can, receive those afterward.
Okay. Well, perfect. I see Chris is back, so I can throw the mic to her to let her introduce herself, if that is okay.
Thanks, Jo. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
The time was right. My apologies on that. I was thwarted by technology this morning. I am Chris Thomas from the Chris Thomas Company, LLC. I actually left the Oregon Center on Behavioral Health and Justice Integration just a couple months ago as the director and set out to create my own LLC as a consultant. My background is as a therapist. I started out in corrections in a maximum security prison, as well as juvenile corrections, and then have moved into policy work over the years within a number of state agencies. I am also currently the, well, I'm not the host anymore because I just left the company, of the Center Collaborative, the Creative Solutions in Behavioral Health and Criminal Justice, which is a podcast about the intersection of behavioral health and criminal justice and what works, not just what doesn't work. And I am also the facilitator for Oregon's Commitment to Change work group, which is looking at rethinking the civil commitment laws in Oregon. I am currently in the process of getting my doctorate from USC in organizational change and leadership, and am in my dissertation journey around psychiatric advanced directives known as declarations of mental health treatment in Oregon. Hopefully that helps, Michelle.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you both so much for those introductions. And then, Chris, did you have a statement also prepared about your thoughts on the intersection of community safety and substance use?
Yeah. What I've found over the years in this intersection is that it's really about taking opportunities to meet people where they are in a way that is helpful for them. So, for example, when I worked in corrections, I specialized in working with folks who presented with severe and persistent mental illness, who cycled in between general population and the inpatient psychiatric unit. And for those individuals, there were a lot of complex issues going on with them, much like the folks that we are working with in the community. And if we just put folks into silos around what their crisis was or what was going on with them in that moment, was it that they had done a lot of substances in the community and had organic damage? Was it a psychotic process? And we spent so much time trying to figure out which silo folks were in. We missed being able to help them. We also missed being able to help folks when treatment and access is based upon what works for us versus what works for the individual that we are trying to reach. So a lot of our systems traditionally are built upon if someone comes in on time, if they keep their appointments, if they take their medications, if they're pleasant to work with, and they're considered compliant. That works for folks who have some stuff going on, but a majority of their life is not in chaos. The folks that we are trying to reach that are thought spend the most money in the system and are in the most need of our help generally do not have that level of being able to organize and meet those expectations. And as long as we continue to make treatment part of you have to be this organized in order to be able to reach it or to deserve it, we make it really difficult to reach the population that we truly want to meet. So we've seen instances in Oregon where, like through the Impacts Grant in Douglas County, money is being used differently because a lot of the time our silos is wrapped up in our money, right? I can't use it for this thing that's really helpful because it has to go here, even though this is not the helpful thing. So the Impacts money has been able to take general fund in order to be able to meet people's needs for what they actually need when they need it. For example, they had a guy who's coming out of prison, he had a lot going on. He needed work boots so he could work. Now, through all the traditional systems, you getting that man work boots. They're able to get him work boots. They're able also to get him some other issues work that through this program, and they haven't seen him. So being able to think about how we use their money. In another county in Oregon, they used it to buy a lady a vacuum cleaner because she went to crisis every time her house was dirty. Like, so thinking about how we reach people, taking opportunities to reach people when they're in front of us. When someone goes into the hospital, if they don't reach this level of crisis in Oregon, they're sent away because they don't reach that simple commitment crisis point. We lose so much opportunity when someone is ready for help, but they haven't reached our level of what constitutes getting help. So thinking about our system in a way where we're the ones who are removing systemic barriers to treatment instead of reinforcing those systemic barriers, looking at the walls that we have built with policy and programming and going, gosh, there's a wall there. We can't do anything because there's a wall there. Instead, stepping back and thinking about, we built that wall, those walls are built by us. How do we think about either removing that wall or going around that wall instead of just saying there's a wall there? And I think from a organizational change and leadership point, when we're thinking about policy and programming within this intersection, it's looking at our opportunities for engagement to meet people where they are with things that are actually helpful. And how do we change our system to be responsive instead of expecting the folks that need our help to meet our level of where we think they need to be in order to achieve that help. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you, Chris. And because we have a bit more time during this meeting for our panelists than we have in the past, we're going to open up to Q&A after each person speaks instead of waiting for the full panel to share their statement. So if anyone has questions for Chris, now's the time.
Questions for Chris? We've got some comments.
Hey, my name's Curtis Klingenberg.
Hey, Curtis.
I have a question.
Go ahead, and then we'll get Rep Davis. We'll get to you. Go ahead, Curtis.
With it, do you guys ever help with like transportation with your services? Because I've been there firsthand out of prison, where I had to go and get a drug and alcohol evaluation, and then go check in with like some IOP group or do a UA, and I've been violated and had to do 180 days in jail because I had to check in on one side of the town and then go and do a UA on the other side of town. And I was 5 days out of prison and I had no way to get there.
So, Chris, I think the question. Go ahead.
So I can speak to that. First of all, thank you, Curtis, for your question. Much appreciated. I think that this really speaks to this issue around thinking about how we can be helpful for what people truly need in this aspect of transportation. So when I was a release counselor at the Department of Corrections, we would do transportation for folks back to their home, the county seat, right? And sometimes that's not what folks need. They need more than that. So thinking about with policy and programming around, are there peers that could meet somebody when they are leaving being incarcerated? Is there a way that we can think about centering where services are so folks don't have to go all over the place in order to be able to meet their appointment needs? And Curtis, I think you're really speaking to that around when we're thinking about setting up our systems, how do we make it easier for folks to get places on certain times? So think all of us thinking about our best day versus the day where you're not having a good day. For me, I have not had enough coffee yet today. Okay. So asking me to do multiple things at once, especially when I'm in crisis and I'm in a transition point, can be really, really difficult. So extending that to the folks that we are working with and thinking about transportation and thinking about how we set up programming, thinking about how we help people get to where they need to go, instead of expecting fresh out of a transition point like incarceration to figure out transportation and how to figure out how to do the transportation system and meet all these appointments versus helping folks facilitate that, I think is my best answer for that.
Chris, can I just add to that? Curtis, I know, so my background was in crisis response, and I also helped implement a jail diversion program in my local community before I moved to the center. And that was kind of one of the focuses that I attempted when I was in the jail diversion role, was creating a kind of a soft handoff right from release from Department of Corrections. I had a couple release counselors that reached out to me prior to the individual they were working with getting released, so that I could have appointments for them. Their OHP would be turned back on, because again, as I think Chris alluded to, everything ties back to funding. So as long as the funding was turned on and I could help get everything in order so that those services could be billed, we could provide those type of services. But again, it took a lot of coordination with people assisting getting them into those correct silos so that we could offer that level of support through peer type services.
All right, thank you. Rep Davis, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Chris, my question is specific to, you mentioned this sort of ensuing conversation about civil commitment in the state of Oregon. So I've been contacted by a couple folks from the media down there who said that there's the conversation regarding expanding Oregon's sort of notice of mental illness or civil commitment for mental illness to include civil commitment for substance use disorder, which we passed that legislation in this state 7 years ago. But curious if you could, given the focus of this group on substance use disorder specifically, if you could talk about some of the dialogue related to civil commitment for substance use disorder in Oregon.
Sure. So the group that I facilitate is through the Oregon Judicial Department. It is a multi-level stakeholder group that was convened by the Chief Justice of Oregon. It is looking at a variety of questions around the civil commitment system in Oregon. So not only around the bar in Oregon, around what level someone needs to be at in acuity in order to meet the level for civil commitment, but also what kinds of
Does it work anymore?
what kinds of symptomology makes sense.
You guys do it today?
That makes sense for
Not speaking to mute yourselves. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
meets criteria for civil commitment, and that's been looking at a variety of issues. So what we typically think about is people in silos, right? So and we see this in the statute in Oregon. You have 426, which is about psychiatric civil commitment, and 427, which is about commitment for IDD. And there's lots of people who can have a TBI that didn't reach a certain level, and they don't meet under each statute. The same thing happens with substance use. You can have someone who has a variety of things going on. And then if there's enough substance use going on right now in Oregon, someone can say, well, it's not being driven by mental health, it's being driven by their substance use. And so we start talking about where someone fits in the silos of our statute versus talking about what's really going on with that person as the gestalt of that person, not just the pieces that fit our statute. So in Oregon, civil commitment around substance use has been part of that conversation, but not the main thrust of the conversation. The main thrust of the conversation has been more around how do we find a system that has a better continuum of care instead of the alpha and omega of options. And then the idea of how do we start looking and treating people and having a system that is responsive to what's going on with someone holistically versus what silos of funding and what silos of statute they fit into. So it's more of that holistic conversation in Oregon and not just around civil commitment and substance use. Does that help answer your question, or is there any pieces of that that you'd like me to speak to further?
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Deontay, do you have a question for?
Yes, I do. And thank you so
All right.
much, Chris. I wanted to ask a little bit more about your advocacy, because how do you do in the areas around navigating community members through housing, coming in or out of the judicial system? How is that in Oregon?
Apologies, I keep losing my mic or my mouse. Deontay, thank you so much for your question. So personally, I work on policy and statute. I don't provide programming within Oregon. So I'm one of the folks that are in policy and statute conversations a lot. But what I can speak to is some of the solutions that we've been seeing in Oregon, or attempts at solutions. So I think Joe can speak to quite eloquently around the sequential intercept mapping process that is happening in Oregon. And what I can tell you when I was at the center, and I think Joe can speak to even more so, is that housing is an issue that happens, gets talked about in every single county as a gap, like housing in general. But then when you start speaking, Deontay, of someone who's coming out of incarceration, and I'm not saying that this is for you, but I'm saying this is for, as a whole, what we see as gaps in the system. There are systemic pieces of our policy that we have in our housing that just makes it impossible to find housing for some folks. So if folks have certain charges in their history, it makes it really difficult to find housing for them because of insurance issues and liability issues. So if they were to have any history of arson or any history of any sex offenses, that makes it really, really difficult to find housing. If someone in their housing is not completely, speaking to substance use, is not completely not using substances, like so we have the 3 levels of housing, right? Wet, damp, and dry. So in Oregon, dry, most housing in Oregon is considered dry housing, someone can't be using. And so people can end up losing their housing for the process of going through recovery, which we all know is not a linear process where you say, today I'm going to stop using substances and I will never use them again. And I will be dry or sober forever. And if I do, there's a moral failing where I should lose all my housing and all my treatment. When you say it like that, it sounds really ridiculous, but these are the assumptions that our policy is built upon, is that someone needs to reach a certain level in order to obtain and maintain housing. So starting to think about the systemic barriers that we put into place when we think about housing, and some of them make a lot of sense, right? Like a history of arson makes some sense on why you would be nervous about having someone in your housing. But thinking about how we work through that with folks and how we work through that in policy, instead of just saying, no, we're not going to have folks, because then we end up having housing situations where folks just don't fit because we're so worried about the liability and if someone fits in a silo. So being reflexive and thoughtful in our policy around how we're going to make that work instead of just making it a no. Joe, do you want to speak to Sim on that at all?
Like Chris mentioned, we do the sequential intercept mapping across the entire state, and that is where we go into communities and we walk through a map that was created by Policy Research Associates, and that it's a visual representation of the flow that of the criminal justice system that someone would normally go through, and how to identify intercepts of getting them out of that. And we've tried to collate the data that we've gotten across the time doing this. And I believe the center started doing the SIM work in 2016. And it has been a consistent issue in almost every community that we go into, that there's not enough housing stock or low barrier housing, specifically the low barrier housing, because there's often that common idea of not in my backyard. So not only do we have the systemic barriers of the housing requirements, but then the challenges with putting these individuals in the community somewhere that is going to be accepted by their neighbors and somewhere that they could be successful. Because again, as was alluded to earlier with transportation, accessibility to services within the community and being mindful about where that is so they could access those services is also important. And I don't know that I can speak to anywhere that's doing that well. There's a lot of pilot projects right now in Oregon going on with different like small village housing. I know I was in Eugene recently and they actually have like little like single bedroom, almost like a little hut type thing in the parking lot of their police station for short-term housing for individuals so that they are not sleeping on the street and there's a safe place for them to go. So there are different options I know that Oregon is looking at to try to kind of address some of those challenges.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate those answers and those questions. I think we have time for just one last one for this group. Malika, go ahead.
I want to say thank you both for your presentation with us today. I also want to uplift for other work group members and for HCA. We had a missed opportunity when we were talking during our initial process of making recommendations around housing. And I really would like to put a fine point on the experts in the room that have come to join us from Oregon have mentioned the same concern that many of us had in that housing work group, is that we need to have a spectrum of housing options for people, and that we cannot continue to prioritize the funding, the public funding of abstinence-only housing. And Chair Candelario, for that group that we were all in together, the Healthcare Authority, we support the Walker standards, but they are based on, abstinence only perspective. And so I'd just like to uplift again that these experts have shared with us that we need to have a spectrum of low barrier options in order to safely house people. And I also direct question for our chair of this group. What's happening with what we did get out of that work group process, which was that we were supposed to have a work group talking about housing for people along the spectrum that are not at abstinence yet. So I'm just wondering where that process is in light of this testimony from these experts.
Yeah, sorry, that was a question for you, but do you want me to take it? Okay, yeah. So that's going to take a bit more time to address. I'm happy to reserve some time on the agenda for next time, Malika, to go over that, because it does, there was funding that was given to us in 5536 for a few different housing initiatives. It doesn't quite reflect the spectrum of housing that you've discussed. So when it's time to review the report, for the annual report, we can get the committee's feedback for, on the gaps that remain, and communicate to the legislature through the report where the need has been met and where it has not been met based on the original recommendation, and respond to that issue once again, if that would be a satisfactory way to address that. But, we're doing what we can with what we've been given, funding wise and policy wise.
It's not satisfactory, because actually one of the recommendations, the recommendation that we did get out, despite of the advocacy towards something different, was that HCA was supposed to be convening a work group to discuss the continuum of options. So where is that process? That's what I'm asking about specifically. Where is that process of, towards building that work group? That does not require what you're describing. We know there's gaps. So, I mean, I understand you have a formal process that you need to go through, but based on the testimony that we have just heard, where are we with the process of developing the work group to discuss this gap that we already know is present and that was part of the SURSAC recommendations? We don't need the legislature to act on that.
Right, but establishing, and I want to move on from this quickly, because Jo still has to give her statement and we have Q&A time for that. But I just want to say it does take a lot of manpower to establish even a work group. So some funding, full-time employees, people are needed to move that forward, but happy to discuss this more and talk about what we can do without having, specific funding allocated toward that project. But we'll need to save that for another time since we've got our panelists here to hear from.
Okay.
Okay. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up again, Malika. All right, Joe. If you've got your statement, you can go ahead and proceed with that, and then we'll have a bit of time for Q&A before moving on to the criminal legal system panelists.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. It was an honor to be asked to come here to speak. I wanted to, in reflecting about Measure 110 and what has happened in Oregon since that was implemented, one factor that I had never even thought of until we were in a community and it was brought to our attention was the impact that it had on individuals that were actively using. We've gotten feedback from a probation officer that he had been continually, not just by one individual, but by multiple people that were on his supervision caseload, they had felt as though they were not as important or they felt dismissed after 110 had been implemented, that a lot of times the only thing that was motivating individuals to get access help was that getting charges and having that forced upon them. And while we obviously know that that is not the best option to force someone into compliance, forcing people's hand is never ideal, I didn't even consider the alternative and how that could impact people and making them feel less than because we were decriminalizing drugs. Originally, when the 110 came out, it was written that we would have increased access to inpatient treatment, which I was very excited about. At that time, I was doing crisis response. And like Chris had talked about, in Oregon, if someone is actively using and exhibiting some psychotic type behavior, I would get called out as a crisis worker. However, if they had any sort of substances in their system, there was nothing ultimately I could do for them because the only option I had for anywhere for them to go was a psychiatric facility, which wouldn't accept them if they tested positive for anything. So there were a lot of individuals that were in a silo. They'd use, become actively psychotic, come to the ER because they'd come to the attention of law enforcement. I would go in, respond, they'd sober up and want to get help, but there was nowhere for them to go. I had someone in the hospital once that chronic user wanted to get help. And then I was working on trying to get him into a detox facility because that was the only option after hours. There was 2 local to me and I couldn't get him into either one of them. And then he ended up walking out of the facility because there was no reason for me to keep them there and then committing a crime and ultimately going to prison because of that. So having access, especially in rural communities, and I really appreciate the light being brought to a rural community because that is also, I worked in a rural community. The closest detox is over 45 minutes away from where I am. I had nothing local. We have the ER, the jail to send people to get them assistance and the challenges with that. And that is partly why I really like the sequential intercept mapping that we're doing. And I know that we've met with different representation in Washington that is going to start doing that process as well. So I'm really excited for you all to be able to have that as an option, especially as you're considering these changes and going to legislation, because having that data and that information from community specific challenges can be helpful so that we're not just grouping everyone into the same, oh, this is the answer, everyone do this, but that each community has its own voice and can identify what it is that it needs and how to best get there. So I could ramble forever. I'm going to stop there, Michelle, and give it back to you if there's any questions.
Any questions for Joe?
I have would just like to add to something and highlight that something that
Please.
Joe was talking about.
Yeah, please.
So when Joe was talking about access and the criminal justice system being an access point for treatment, thinking about the access points that we do have for treatment. So for example, Lane County Jail They don't make someone wait a year in order to go through MAT with them. They look at where access makes sense for the folks that need it, regardless of how long they've been there. They're also thoughtful about what kind of treatment someone needs, and making sure that they get that treatment. And while they're cognizant and handling the behavioral needs that are happening, and there are expectations for behavior, what the person needs and what they need for treatment and the opportunity for treatment is the driver on how they access treatment in the Lane County Jail. So thinking about that as we're thinking about access, it doesn't always have to be access through a community porthole. We can also be thinking about access within a jail setting as another opportunity to reach people for treatment, because sometimes that's the best opportunity we have.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. Any last questions for our panelists here? Okay, Malika?
So I thank you for that, Chris. I hear you, but do you see around the not only having community-based access points for folks, but I struggle with the further investment in criminal legal system, access to treatment services when we know that that isn't a place that works. Like that isn't the most effective place for people to be able to get access to the services that they need. And that is also the place that, unfortunately, generally is the place that systems feel most comfortable investing in. So we continue to see the lack of meaningful investment in community-based access. So what do you feel like there's a nuance there to be?
I do think that there is a nuance there. It's not either or. So like Joe was talking about with sequential intercept mapping, it's taking someone throughout the possibility of opportunities to engage with someone throughout the system. Now, a lot of the work that I do and the work that Joe does is really about where we can deflect and divert early out of the system, because you're right, the criminal justice system doesn't have a choice, does not have a choice. That is why the system ends up, a lot of times people end up in that system is the system that's easiest to invest in, right? Because you have an audience and they must respond. It doesn't mean it's the right system or the system that we should be using to access healthcare. So yes, diversion, deflection, and community versus resources, absolutely important. We see that in civil commitment as well, right? If you only invest in the hospital, that's where all your investment, all your people go, versus investing in the community where you have a continuum of options. But you need both. So if someone is in jail, not necessarily they're not there because of using substances, but there is a gestalt of things going on, right? Let's say that they have committed they've committed a crime. They may have other things going on. They may have mental health issues. They may have physical issues. They may have substance use issues. The jail still needs to respond to those and have the resources and able to respond to those. So and the person in jail needs those treatment needs responded to. So yes, while we do need to be investing more in the community for diversion and deflection, we absolutely still need to be able to invest for the folks that are in the criminal justice system, because their concerns don't go away once they're incarcerated. Plus, we have an extra issue of once someone is in jail, we have an extra funding issue, at least in Oregon. I'm not sure how it's handled in Washington. But in Oregon, if someone is in the Department of Corrections, there's general fund that is used in order to meet someone's health needs. For state general fund, in Oregon for jails, for county jails, it's county general fund. And that differs considerably on what is available depending on how much money is available in the county coffers. So jail systems need to and are expected and want to respond to folks' health needs when they're in the jail system. And it becomes really, really difficult from a funding point of view because the funding isn't there, especially in smaller communities. So it makes it really difficult to fund people's needs while we're there. So thinking about how we're doing funding, there's some questions that are coming up with the Medicaid waiver and whether that's going to address that or not. I haven't heard one way or the other which way emphatically it's going to go. But we still need to be thinking about how we meet people's needs throughout as they go throughout the system, not just if this part of the system, then we'll meet their needs. But if they're in this part of the system, we don't meet their needs, or we don't meet their needs as much. We need to be thinking about what that person needs holistically, regardless of where they're in the system, and not make the door what makes it available for treatment, but what that person needs to run treatment, not which door they came into the system. Does that help, that nuance?
It does. Thank you. And I think that Lisa Dugard's point of the dynamics can be addressed by adopting a principle that no resources will be more available through the jail arrest booking than they would be in the community, like, so that we make sure that we have a balanced approach to what's happening. Thank you, Chris.
And I did just want to clarify, I think that's maybe where Oregon, the downfall is that we were supposed to have these systems in place for people to go to so that it wasn't the hospital or the jail that they were going to. And I think that's why we're still having the same problem that we're having, is that infrastructure never came to fruition. So rather than people getting the help, now they're going to the hospital, or they can't go to the jail because now it's not even a criminal matter. So now they're feeling more dismissed. So as long as we're not forgetting the infrastructure, I guess that was kind of my point. And I hope that I didn't misconstrue that when I was sharing originally, but just keep it in mind, making sure there's somewhere for people to go so they don't feel like they're being dismissed and there's options for them.
All right. Thank you so much. Great discussion, great information shared. Appreciate it. Michelle?
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris and Joe, for your perspectives, your professional experience and personal and all of that. So we are running a little bit behind, but I think we will have sufficient time for our next panel. Now we're moving on to the criminal legal system. And we'll begin with Lieutenant Keith Johnson. You want to share your statement?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Keith Johnson. I'm a patrol lieutenant with the Bellingham Police Department, in the corner of the state. I've been with the police department for almost 25 years, including 6 years working in the drug unit. So this is kind of a subject close to my heart, and happy to answer any questions when we get going.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and if you have a statement to share now, and then we'll do questions right after that.
Sure. Yeah, I think just going off, Michelle, some of the questions that you sent, one of which is whether I've observed any misconceptions about the intersection of community safety and substance use that are driving unnecessary fear, concern, or policies. I do think I have a unique perspective on this. I sit on several groups of downtown merchants and people that are having daily interactions with people that are using drugs downtown. And so in my opinion, it's not necessarily a misconception. I agree that better information and policy is always going to be beneficial. But the concerns of merchants and other downtown citizens surrounding drug use and sales and related behavior is real. One example that I saw of information that was helpful, and there's always room for improvement in this area, is HIDA put out some information on kind of the dangers of secondhand fentanyl smoke and fentanyl paraphernalia laying around. And it was actually very reassuring to the groups that we put it out to. So I think anytime there's an opportunity for that, to help people understand better exactly what they're dealing with and any safety risks, that we need to take advantage of that. I think with regards to your second question, safety threats that I've seen, I think I can speak for most of our officers as well as a lot of the citizens of Bellingham. The biggest concern surrounding substance abuse is two-pronged. It's the unpredictability of people that are under the influence of drugs, and we see particularly methamphetamine is the biggest problem, although fentanyl certainly is right up there. And then the other thing is that to support those drug habits, people need to commit crime for the most part. There's some people that don't, but property crime and unfortunately crimes against people are part and parcel to drug use because they need to get money to buy their drugs. So I think that is the biggest concern. We I was actually just listening to a patrol call this morning where a downtown business owner called in, and there's a group that kind of sets up in the alley behind his business. And he said, "Hey, we just need some officers down here. My employees are arriving at work and they just don't feel safe. There's a fire burning in one of the rubbish bins. There's people actively using drugs in the alley." And so that's certainly been a challenge for the police to figure out how to deal with that ongoing pattern. And we've seen more drug use. And so we're certainly open to any, and we understand that the past, trying to arrest our way out of it doesn't work. And so any support that we are getting and other ways of looking at that problem to find longer term solutions we're in favor of. And then it's just a question of how does law enforcement fit into that big picture. What programs or strategies are working? I work quite a bit with some of the tiny home villages in Bellingham, and in my opinion, those are a big success. I think that being able to get people somewhere where they are accessible and are amenable to services and help is a huge first step. We've had great success with the 3 tiny villages, which are run by a couple of different organizations here in Bellingham. And they've really done a good job. We have the LEAD and the GRACE programs, which are designed to reduce the burden on law enforcement and fire by looking at longer term solutions and assigning people intensive case managers. And typically the criteria for those programs is many of you probably know is repeated law enforcement contacts or low-level arrests or a lot of calls into 911. So yeah, my participation in the LEAD program, I've experienced that it is successful. We have the rates of police contact specifically that for individuals that have been enrolled with the LEAD program is the success rate's been fantastic. I mean, we've had people that we've maybe contact 40 times and then they get enrolled in LEAD, and we've now contacted them 3 times since then. So I think the more energy and effort and money we can put into those programs where they have a case manager and people that are maybe having a hard time getting things done themselves now have somebody that can steer them and guide them through that process. So I think we're making progress. It's slow, but we're pointed in the right direction.
All right. Thank you. Questions for Officer Johnson? Okay. Malika.
Thank you, Officer Johnson, for joining us today. So I'm curious, do you feel like if there were, where would you think that more resources need to be focused as far as like helping to support people and so that you're not having to come in contact with them, so that people are getting the needs that they have met, so that maybe they can get to a more stable place, so they're not using drugs outside. What are some of your thoughts on that?
3 things. I think intensive case management works. Housing is critical, and of course that's a huge issue, but I think that's an essential element of that. And then of course the downstream services. So when we have someone that's in a place where they are ready to work towards recovery, there's somewhere for them to go.
So what I'm hearing you say is housing, some intensive case management, like what you have with Grace and Lead, like more of that, like more, and then support services for folks when they are in that initial stability, entering stability phase, so that they can progress further along.
Correct. And that would include resources for reintegration after coming out of treatment. So people don't slide right back into the same pattern.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Malika, for the question. Anyone else? All right, Officer Johnson, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it. And next up, we have Chad Enright. Chad, you with us? Hello.
I am. Good morning.
Good morning.
So my name is Chad Enright. I am the Kitsap County prosecutor. I think many of you have probably heard me as a SURSAC member over the last few years. I've been with the Kitsap County prosecutor's office for, almost 16 years. And then prior to that, I did some public defense work, working for one of our other panelists here, Judge Hemstreet, who was kind enough to give me my first job out of law school. I guess just to kind of dovetail off a little bit of what we've been talking about already this morning, in terms of misconceptions and things that we sometimes hear, I think one of the big misconceptions that I occasionally hear from the public is a feeling that we can arrest and prosecute our way out of substance use disorder, and we can't. We have plenty of history that shows that you can't prosecute your way out of it. At the same time, though, I think it's a misconception to say that it's never effective and never something that works. And there are people who desperately want treatment, and having those options available to them in the community is important. But the question and the issues that we oftentimes deal with in the criminal justice system are those people that either aren't able to access that treatment or aren't looking for that treatment, don't want that treatment. I know over the course of the last year or so, we talked about public safety, we've talked about safe injection sites and safe supply. When I hear from the public talking about public safety, they have a different perspective on it. And I got this email a couple of months ago, and I don't want to, well, hopefully I don't bore you with reading this, but this is kind of typical of the things that I hear from the public. I feel compelled to bring to your attention that while on a simple family walk today, myself, 14-year-old son, husband, and many other innocent citizens were attacked by a drug-induced violent transient today. While trying to enjoy the day walking our dogs along the Paulsbo Boardwalk downtown, we were screamed at by a transient man. He used violent, vulgar, threatening words to all that walked past him. I watched mothers clutching their infant children and run. Then came our turn. We had to pass. Holding our heads down with my husband trying to protect us, we had to pass the enraged transient on the bench. To our horror, he decided to target and attack us while screaming, "I'm going to cut your throats, burn you alive," along with other vulgar terms and curse words one could imagine. He cased us down the narrow boardwalk towards the children's playground. My son and I were able to escape up a set of stairs towards the street while my husband saved us by running along the path while on the phone diverting the transient away from myself, my son, mothers, infants, and other innocent people. Thank God the Paulsbo police officers responded. They peacefully and swiftly took this violent attacker into custody. Sharing the story with you to please put an end to the madness, the fear, and the violence. You are protecting violent, drug-addicted people, and you care nothing of innocent, law-abiding taxpayers. And so that is oftentimes what we hear in the criminal justice system. I think a really good point was made earlier that the criminal justice system shouldn't necessarily have more resources for drug treatment than outside the criminal justice system. but sometimes those treatment options maybe need to be a little different. That we are oftentimes dealing with people who've committed other crimes, and how do we provide treatment options to those folks? Let me just briefly talk about our new possession law, because we've got a few weeks into that, and at this point, at least in my office, we've gotten very few drug cases referred to us from law enforcement at this point. What we're doing on virtually all of them is we are diverting them, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of resources to divert people to, so we're just asking that people get substance use evaluations and comply with those treatment recommendations, and once they do that, we'll dismiss their cases. One of the neat things, though, that we are working on, and we should have open here in a few weeks, in one of our municipal courts in the city of Paulsbo, we are working on getting what we call a Recovery Resource Center opened up. And so what we're going to do with our drug cases that are charged within the city of Paulsbo is we're going to have one of our police navigators who's going to be there in court. And if we file charges against somebody for drug possession and we ask them to get a drug and alcohol evaluation and comply with treatment, that navigator is going to be able to take that person right from court to the Recovery Resource Center, where we're going to have people who can do evaluations. We're going to have mental health counselors there. We're going to have peer support services there. We're going to have a medical nurse there to work with people who have any medical issues. Going to have a center coordinator who's going to help people get benefits, work on housing applications, licensing, food issues for people that have issues with food, access to computers for people that don't have access to computers, and so much of what happens nowadays is online. I'm really excited about that, and I think that's the criminal justice system. We're not great at dealing with substance use disorder, but I think that's the type of thing that we can do in the future, and I hope that it's going to work, and it's doing our best to try to meet people where they are, which once they're in the criminal justice system, that oftentimes is in court. So I don't know if people have any questions or comments. I'm happy to discuss any of this.
Yeah, we've got a couple questions. Thank you. Malika, why don't you go ahead and start? And then we have a question in the chat as well.
So,
Malika, why don't you start off?
Okay. Thank you for sharing that with us, Prosecutor Enright. So it's interesting to me that it is too bad when we see people that are suffering on the streets. It is too bad that we see people they're being stigmatized for their extreme behavioral health issues, and we don't have the resources to meet them. And the response is then to send law enforcement once people have devolved into such a state that they are becoming threatening and violent towards those around them, because they probably have experienced violence throughout their whole entire life, including from the criminal legal system. So it's, I'm glad that you're opening this resource center. I'm curious, what are the hours going to be? Is there going to be outreach associated with that? And if somebody is in a state like what was being described, I don't imagine that they would be able to engage with that. So I'm curious, how are you engaging with the Recovery Navigator program or anything in your area? I know I've heard you said they didn't have enough teeth. So, I mean, at what point do people need to get chewed up in order to get the help they need? Just curious.
I'm not sure I understand your question in terms of getting chewed up. What do you mean?
I think that I've heard from multiple people in the community, in your community, that you don't engage with your office doesn't engage with the Recovery Navigator program because it doesn't have enough teeth. So, I mean, what you described in that letter is a person who we've broken our social contract with that individual. They are in such a state of impact by all of the social neglect that they have received, that they were behaving in a way that was not safe for them or for the people that they were engaging with. So what are the hours going to be for your court center, the civil, the municipal center that you're describing?
So when it opens, it's going to be open 1 day a week, which is going to be the same day that we hold court that one day. On the days that it's not open, we're going to have domestic violence services there. We're going to have showers and peer support groups there, and we're going to have telehealth there. It's a start, and I'm not going to tell you that this is the end all be all. This is a grant funded program, and it is a start.
And so for all the people that are engaging in the behaviors that you've described, because you said that you hear stories like that all of the time, what is the response other than a criminal legal response? Like, and since your office does not engage with the Recovery Navigator program in your area, what do you view, because it doesn't have enough teeth?
I'm not sure what you mean by it doesn't have enough teeth.
Those are your words from what I've heard from your community members. So maybe you can help me understand what it means when there isn't enough teeth to make people do what it is that the system wants them to do.
Okay, well, I'm not sure who says that or what that means.
Okay.
For this person is probably getting arrested and they're probably getting charged with harassment. And what I would like to be able to do is get this person some level of treatment, because I think you would agree with me that just prosecuting this person for harassment, they're going to serve a sentence and they're going to get out. And we don't want to put them back out in the exact same position that they were in when they came in.
So will you engage in the services, will your office engage with the services that are in your community that are designed to support folks that are most vulnerable?
Yes.
Okay, good.
All right. All right, Malika, thank you. We had Deontay up.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chad. I just wanted to ask a question about, you said something about police navigators. Can you elaborate on like what that position is and what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, there's a navigator within the Paulsville Police Department, and we've also had navigators within the Bremerton Police Department over the last few years. And what they've been doing is trying to engage with people, offer them treatment services, get them into treatment, as opposed to arresting and referring cases to us. I think have those programs been successful over the last few years? I don't know. I mean, I know when we had some testimony in front of the House and Senate last year from a few mayors, and I think they said the statistics that they were saying was somewhere 1 in 100, 1 in 200, 1 in 300 people were taking advantage of those services, and that's at least been consistent with what we've gotten in the city of Bremerton, where I think we had 1 in 300 people who were offered services by a police navigator took them up on those services. So it's a program that I think is still trying to find its feet.
Do you think, well, that was going to be my follow-up question. Do you think that it is successful, or do you think that there's some other programs that could be able to be helpful? Is this navigator my other question is, this navigator, are they in a law enforcement uniform? Are they law enforcement? Are they community of Paulsbo, police liaison, or what exactly does their, are they dressed like cops is my question.
At least in our community, they're not dressed like cops. I don't know. Keith, do you have a similar program in your jurisdiction?
Not anybody that works for the police department, no.
Okay. But they're employed by the police department, they're employed by the cities, but they're not police officers.
Okay. And do you know of any successful stories through the navigation? I know you just read that letter, but do you have any successful navigation stories for us?
I don't have a story for you, but I know that they have been successful at times. And I don't mean to minimize those programs. I mean, I think they are important. Police should have more tools than arresting people and taking them to jail.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Beth Davis.
Thanks so much, Prosecutor Enright, for being here. And thank you for your service on this committee and your willingness to sit in the hot seat here. I appreciate very much that you were saying that desire to divert the vast majority of the sort of Blake convictions that are being sent your way at the moment. You know, in the legislature, our big, our best laid plans don't always work out, but our big kind of master plan and master vision regarding those charges, rather, possession charges and related crimes, that they would in fact funnel to the Recovery Navigator program, which again, of course, is really just a statewide expansion of the LEAD model. And that funding was distributed through the Behavioral Health Administrative Services organizations. So in your area, of course, that's the Salish Tri-County region, and I believe it's operated under the REAL program out there. So I would love, either now or later, if we built that program and funded that program pretty generously for the purpose of prosecutors like yourself actually having resources, to meaningful resources that are evidence-based to refer this population to. And that's amazing that you're getting the Recovery Resource Center and associated with the courts. I don't know if that came out of our therapeutic court pot of money or not, but we think that we've provided resources, and then I hear you say that there really aren't. And so if that Recovery Navigator resource has not reached Kitsap County for whatever reason, I would love to know that, because that was supposed to be for the criminal legal system to have quality services for this population.
I have not seen a robust Recovery Navigator program.
Okay, well, maybe we can talk more offline to figure that out. And we've got some folks that work on that program here, but we can take that offline. But we really want to have appropriate resources for you so that diversion actually is meaningful. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, Officer Johnson, giving you the title there.
I'll just take a minute. I had a couple of comments on some of the things that Chad was saying. Just my take on the Recovery Navigator program and the cards that we had asked officers to give out there for a while. We did not see good utilization of that either. I think the biggest factor was when people were receiving those cards, they weren't really in a place where they were inclined to reach out to make that phone call. And even if we tried to connect them with that, it's just something that there wasn't an interest in doing on their part. And I think, that gets back to the question of, do people need some sort of motivator to get pointed in the right direction? And that's a difficult question to answer. But that I'll just say that we haven't found that to be real effective on our end. The other thing that I think bears mentioning is Malika was talking about the individual referenced in Chad's email that was harassing the people. The police department gets complaints like that from citizens on a weekly basis. And I just wanted to throw out that there is a time when arrest and jail is an appropriate option. And I think that's when people's actions are jeopardizing the safety of other community members. And so we need to keep that in mind. I think it's a great goal to work towards services on the back end. But ultimately, when someone is in a position where they're creating jeopardy for the community, physical jeopardy, jeopardizing people's safety, then that's what I think needs to happen. That's all I got.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So we looks like we have 3 more questions in the queue. For timing, this looks like this may be it. This person for, okay, if we could make our comments concise, that'd be awesome. So Julian, go ahead.
Hello. Hey, Chad.
Hey.
Hey, Julian.
Hey, I just want to point out that I believe that when somebody gets to a point to where they're behaving that way, we fell in like many places, both mental health and in substance abuse. If that was in fact the case, but I find like opportunities to catch people earlier are not there. Like as myself, I went out. I wanted to find help at a certain point and had to wait. And out of fear, out of stigma, out of whatever, to get help, when it was, then it got to be too late. And I'm telling you, jail is not a therapeutic environment to help anybody. It's just transferring one problem to another, and can disrupt people have going good. I would say the majority of my friends that in Chicago that were using drugs had no involvement in the police ever. Like you're just seeing people that are in an entirely different environment. There's a lot of people out there that have that you're not seeing, and you're not going to see them until something happens later on, until the stigma hides them and they don't get help. They don't talk to their doctor. They don't talk to people for help because of the way we, because it's criminalized and it looks bad, and people don't want to get in trouble. So I think we need to start thinking about catching people earlier. I was watching this documentary about it's called Do No Harm, about the opioids, and they have somebody started a safe station, which is a more invited, like a safe station, which is where where fire stations, they can walk in any fire station who wants help for drugs, and they don't have any, they don't have to go to go through the police department or go through whatever, but they can go there any time of day, 24 hours a day, and go into these places. And this is in like Manchester, New Hampshire, and that looked like to me that seems like a great idea, to have a place that people know that they can go to, and multiple systems like phones, calls, whatever, like any way you can get people earlier or get people to do it on their own and voluntarily go in is the best time to prevent further problems, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Julian. When you said that, by the time the criminal justice system is involved, it's oftentimes too late, and we are dealing with a small portion of people suffering from substance use disorder. So once they reach the criminal justice system, yeah, we've got to have some tools, and we've got to have some things that we can do. And I also think you're right. I wouldn't be at all surprised if mental health wasn't also an issue for that person in the email.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Robin?
Hi, my question, Chad, is around that Recovery Resource Center. Does it follow the community hub model and have like providers of different services that come in and provide those services, or is it just one entity that is running it and providing all of those different avenues?
It is going to have multiple agencies there. And so I think the idea is to have a physical location and have service providers be able to utilize the center. So it's put together by the city. It is run by the city, but we've got at least some core agencies who will be a part of it in the beginning. And I think the hope is that we can show some level of success and get some more agencies there. In particular, mental health is something that I don't think is really strongly addressed in the initial plan. But the hope is that we can show some level of success and get those agencies in who can help with mental health issues.
Because that's something that we've seen in our community is even with individuals, even not community hubs or recovery cafes, but that they're often run by single entities, and that causes a lot of problems when they're trying to perform such diverse programs. There tends to be a lot of gaps, whereas outside entities coming in that are really specialists in what they do, we've seen more success in that. And I did want to say for us, we do have in Grace Harbor County, we have 2 positions for navigators within the jail and police department, which have been very successful. They've reached a lot of people, but they do constantly refer individuals to our Recovery Navigator program so that we can do follow-up, because it's not built into their position to be able to follow up and continue to reach out in the field, actively engaging with people and building relationships. But we've also seen a lot of increasing utilization by our law enforcement partners and have seen increase in diversion referrals as well as social contact, to the point where we're seeing 60% of our referral source for Grace Harbor County, at least, and we're on track with that in Lewis, is from law enforcement sources. So I would encourage your community to reach out and see how maybe the Recovery Navigator program in your area could work better with you and in ways that will help your community.
Thank you, Robin.
All right, thank you. And we have 2 more. We've got 4 more panelists coming up, so we want to be as quick as we can with our comments. So Kimmy, you're up.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Hi.
I just wanted to hop in and say I am the project manager and program director for Pierre Washington's King County Recovery Navigator program. And I know it's hard as far as buy-in on a law enforcement level, right? When you had so many people say, oh, we're here, and then they're gone again. I know for King County, I can give you statistics just from January that we have reached over 599 people. So that's just as of last month. And 280 more of those came from law enforcement alone. We have gotten 163 people into detox and treatment. We have housed more than 100 people just since January. We really do work to be a tool in the tool belt for law enforcement. We are currently with the strikers or whatever that came with the latest Blake, working with courts to see how that can come. And what we're not trying to do is take away people's consequences. We understand that there's a time and a place that those consequences need to be held. I myself was federally indicted. I get it 100%. But what also I know for a fact to work is even if they have to be arrested, maybe you can contact the RMP, because I know here for us, we are able to go into every single jail there is and meet them where they're at, and therefore getting them from jail straight into detox and treatment. We have the jails, we have a relationship with the jails where they are now holding the individuals specifically until we get there to transport them to ABHS, Triumph, wherever. And RMP is statewide. I know that there are lines drawn in the sand by, counties. However, we have been working side by side with Pierce County, with all these different areas, trying to help, them build up as well. So I'm very passionate about this, as I know everybody on this panel is, and I thank you all. I'm just saying, RMP, give them a try, and I would love to reach out to anybody in any other RMP in any county, for a meeting, a sit down to see how it's working, how it's not, how we can support each other. But I also know that that's what the policy coordination groups are for, if you would like to attend in your area, and then the operational work groups for law enforcement. So thank you.
Thank you. Bill, real quickly if you can.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. My name is Bill Larson. I'm with Island County Human Services. I just wanted to bring to your attention, we have a small, relatively new, but very robust recovery navigator program here in Island County. And the principle that drives this program is harm reduction. And although we don't get a lot of diversion referrals, we get a lot of social contacts from law enforcement. We work with our partners all along the process, whether it's law enforcement, the courts, our co-responders, and then eventually even our jail transition personnel. So we can and we do pick up clients everywhere along this process. And our community partners in the overnight and the day shelters make referrals to our substance use, our SUD and mental health providers. We have a very busy program, and our law enforcement has seen significant reductions in the encounters with folks engaged with the Recovery Navigator program. I applaud you, Officer Johnson, for handing out cards and things like that, but that doesn't work with this group. We got to have boots on the ground. If we're giving them something and expecting them to take the next step on their own because of substance abuse issues or substance use issues, often accompanied with mental health co-occurring disorders, that's not going to lead to success. With our folks, what we're finding is we go out, we track them down, we show them all that we have to offer. And in more instances than not, after the first or the second contact, we somehow get them hooked into the system. And so it's a long game. But I want to just say thank you for having this forum. And we would be happy to talk to anyone or have anyone out here who wants to see how our program functions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Thank you, Prosecutor Enright. Appreciate your time. We're going to go ahead and move on to John Hayden, defense attorney.
Good morning. Thanks for having us here. My name's John Hayden. I practice in Port Angeles. I have been involved in the criminal courts for 45 years now, and I've seen a tremendous evolution in how the system not only perceives but treats substance use. If you were to have had any of these conversations, even 30, 35 years ago, you'd have been laughed out of the room. People would have said we need to build more jails, and we did build more jails, and we are now finally figuring out that just doesn't work. I think everyone understands that now. But a lot of that political response was based, I believe, on fear. We have a fear of the unknown, and we didn't know and still don't know a whole lot about substance use and what it brings to the table. And so we made a lot of decisions that were just in terms of public policy, horribly misguided and in many ways destructive. We still have misperceptions in society. When the Jamestown tribe here in Sequim wanted to started to plan and build their outpatient treatment center, there was tremendous incredibly vocal opposition, and it was based upon fear. It was based upon the old notion that you're going to bring those people into our community. Of course, not acknowledging that those people are already in the community and they need treatment. But that level of opposition just tells us there's still a lot of misunderstanding and fear. So we have to combat that fear by staying the course. And whoever was just said this is a long game. Boy, it certainly is. And it's a long game in terms of education and informing public policy. Not being aware of substance use can lead to all kinds of problems we see in our client base. It can lead to bad decisions if the bench is uninformed. It can lead to bad decisions on conditions of release. It can lead to bad decisions at sentencing. It can put people in even worse positions. We're a little bit lucky out here. I mean, Port Angeles can well be described as rural. In fact, it probably defines that term for those of you who've never been here. It's a long drive. You don't have to have a passport to cross the Hood Canal Bridge, but it is a long drive. And things are magnified in small towns. The problems we have, Chad's psychotic harasser would probably receive maybe even more notice here, because if he's downtown screaming and yelling, a larger percentage of our population is going to see and hear and be affected by that behavior. So things are in some ways magnified in small towns. And we all have the same safety concerns. Everyone in this discussion probably has had a friend, a loved one, a client, a patient pass away. We've lost people. That's an absolute tragedy. And we all feel like we should be able to do something about it. Maybe we can and maybe we can't. But we have to keep trying. It's a long game. There are things that work, however. There are a lot of things that work. We've been lucky out here in PA because our police department was a little bit ahead of the curve. They've had an embedded social worker for a few years now, and every year they publish the data, and it's pretty good science about how effective that's been. It has saved hundreds and hundreds of ER visits, for instance. And in a small town where the ER is often people's primary care clinic, any pressure you can take off of that system is welcomed and important. It's saved countless hundreds of jail days. And we all know what the numbers, the statistics tell us, those cost our governmental entities. And it's kept people out of jail, which is probably a good place to be. We don't need people. Jail is about the least therapeutic place you can imagine. So it's kept people out of jail. So we've been a little bit lucky out here. Those programs have to continue. I was pleased. I think the legislature this year encouraged Recovery Navigator services. Those programs work. And we just have to keep building on that. We have to continue. We really have to continue to understand that this isn't a simple solution. You know, you give somebody SUD treatment, everything's going to be fine. We have to address housing. We have to address mental health. One has to wonder with, again, Chad's bad actor, if that person had had a warm, safe, dry place to sleep and to spend the day, would he have been on that bench yelling at people? Who knows? Probably not. We have to keep that in mind. We need to make access to treatment even better. We still have people that wait way too long to get into inpatient treatment. That shouldn't happen. We should have treatment on demand, period. We're one of the few industrialized nations that doesn't have that. There's no good reason why. And we have to understand, and I think the interesting discussion sort of philosophically for me is this, you know, our people are in the criminal justice system. We don't really particularly, we all understand that's not the best place to provide treatment. It's not a therapeutic place. It is not. This is not a criminal justice issue. This is a public health issue. There's no question about that. But is it either or? Do we either, there's been some discussion about, does the criminal justice system provide better access and better incentives to treatment? I don't think it's an either or discussion. I think we have to put as much as we can into the criminal justice system to provide resources, to provide an avenue, a path to treatment, and help after treatment. We have to do the same before people reach the criminal justice system. It's not a one or the other. It's both. We have to have the political will and to do both. And what I hear a lot of people say today is that we do have that will and we do have that understanding that it has to be an approach that covers both those avenues. The other thing I do want to add in terms of law, I will say that in my experience, it's pretty interesting over many years. I think, and I look back on this, I think that law enforcement, the deputies, the officers that are on the street have been way ahead of the curve in understanding that we can't arrest our way out of this problem. And we find, at least out here, we find tremendous support in law enforcement because they understand the nature of this problem. They deal with it literally every day. And we've gotten great support from law enforcement. And it sounds, you know, when I hear Keith talk, they're pretty enlightened and they're doing some great things. And we just hope we can continue to build on that.
All right. Thank you, sir. We have questions for John. We'll only take about 2 now. We are running out of time. Hunter, go ahead.
See, firstly, I liked hearing from you. Those were some really good points. And I'm curious if you think that maybe the public lacks understanding of the issue. Because like me personally, I've heard a lot of backlash to the policies that we've discussed in here, and their perspectives are definitely reasonable considering the things that they've witnessed, but there's still another side of the story that they haven't seen. So I guess one, do you think that there's ways, and I guess like a need to educate the general public more? And then I'm also curious if there's a lack of participation from the public or the next generations to participate in this issue that we're trying to find solutions for, whether that's volunteers or social workers, etc.
Thanks, Hunter. That's a great question, and I think there's an interesting answer to that. We've all understand the concept of 6 degrees of separation. Well, nowadays, unfortunately, substance use disorder has I think made it so that there aren't 6 degrees of separation anymore. It's like 1 degree. There's nobody who hasn't had a family member, a coworker, a friend, a colleague affected. And I think that's served to be sort of a slap in the face kind of education. People who in the past might have said, well, it's those people and it only happens to those people. And they chose that lifestyle. They might have said that then, but now they realize, oh, it was their cousin or it was their brother or it was their best buddy at work. And they're beginning to realize this is not a discriminatory kind of disease that affects everybody everywhere all the time. And I think people are ironically beginning to understand that because it's becoming so widespread.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I agree with that.
All right, thank you. We don't see any other hands up. Thank you, Mr. Hayden. Appreciate your time and your comments. Let's go ahead and move to Judge Hemstreet.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am Judge Melissa Hemstreet, and I am from Kitsap County Superior Court. I am the judge in charge of the Kitsap County Adult Drug Court, Veterans Treatment Court, and Girls Court. I also do the residential DOSA calendar for our court. And I think probably most importantly for this discussion and for what I've heard this morning, I was a contract public defender and family law attorney in my community for over 16 years before I became a judge. So I've seen how substance use disorder touches many people in our community. And I gave Michelle's questions some thought over the weekend. Thank you, Michelle. And I'm going to start with misconceptions, and it's going to kind of dovetail, I think, with what we just heard from John, in that as far as any observed misconceptions, I would say that many people do not understand that substance use disorder is in fact a disease. They don't understand the harm that substance use disorder causes to the brain. I think many people in our community still believe that people are choosing to take drugs and choosing that lifestyle. And I think because of that, it creates a lower tolerance for the actions of those that are suffering from substance use disorder. I see people in courts on a daily basis that object when the state offers a therapeutic court or a treatment diversion alternative to someone who has committed crimes clearly based upon their substance use disorder. I've had many people, victims of property crimes, victims of no contact order violations, ask me to give them the max and take them out of society. But the reality is that the prosecutor's office isn't asking for that, and it's not going to help. But they don't, in that moment, understand that until I think, like John says, it touches someone in their community, right? And then they begin to understand. So part of the question that Michelle asked is, can those misconceptions be countered with better information or policy. And I don't know that we can write policies to fix this, but I do think better education about what the disease does to the brain and the body and to the people, really, their mind, body, and spirit, right? What it does to those people. I think if we can get more of that message out, I think we'll be helping the community understand why we're doing some of the things that we're doing right now in the legislature. The next, when we were talking about safety threats, either related directly or indirectly to substance use disorder, and what experience I have had, I would say the most concerning thing for me right now, well, there are a couple, but one is the fentanyl use in our community. I think all the deaths that and the overdoses that are happening due to fentanyl is causing more trauma. It's causing more wounds for those in the clean and sober community, leaving more families torn apart, and children dealing with the trauma of a loss of a parent. It's something I hear about frequently from those in the therapeutic courts, and I see in other things that the Superior Court does, including dependencies and family law matters. In my veteran treatment court population, the thing that concerns me the most is the threat of suicide. Earlier this year, we did have a suicide in our court that prompted us to talk about it with a couple of therapists and our participants and discuss safety planning. During that discussion, it became very apparent that almost every veteran in the room had at one point in time contemplated taking their life, and some had taken actions coming really close to taking their life. An alarming number of those were combat veterans. One of the frustrations is that it can take so long to get set up for help with the VA that they feel like it's hopeless and no one cares. When we try to divert people to the local community, it's often a long process due to lack of providers, which is also usually compounded for vets because most private providers don't take their insurance. The complaint that I hear the most about from members of the public when I go places is people using drugs openly in the streets, kind of like the email that Mr. Enright just discussed. It is being done publicly in places where others are potentially forced to breathe in the smoke, or parents are having to explain that person's actions to their children. Then sometimes what I hear is then they watch these people get behind the wheel of a car, endangering not only themselves, but others. And then the frustration is the belief that law enforcement either cannot or will not do anything about it. My hope is that the changes in the law that occurred in July will answer some of those questions for the public. But in my final question from Michelle, we're going to talk about resources, which I think is a theme that we've heard often this morning. We do have 2 detox facilities in our community, so we're lucky, but those have limited beds, and sometimes it's hard to get people in there, and sometimes they're not in crisis enough to get in there. And we've had a particularly difficult time getting females in crisis into beds because that population has even fewer beds in inpatient and in detox facilities. Now, I believe in the therapeutic court model. As a public defender, I saw therapeutic courts help my clients turn their lives around. Now, as a judge, I get to see it on a daily basis. Obviously, like any cure, it's not 100%. I also believe that there are other options that are available for other people. And if we could do enough preventative to keep people from coming to my court, I'd be happy with that too. But we're not there yet. And I do think it has gotten better with the additional support of other options in the community for those suffering with substance use disorder. Locally, we work with and partner with a lot of local organizations in my therapeutic courts. And I'm going to talk about those as well. But I did want to touch on the Recovery Navigator program. In Kitsap County, they're not called that. They are called the REAL teams. And we do have several REAL teams that work through our treatment providers, our substance use treatment providers, they don't have a lot of interaction with the courts or the prosecutor's office because they go out into the community. They go out where they see a need. They go out into the homeless camps. And I know this because the REAL team has a lot of participants that are drug court graduates on it. And when I talk to the graduates out in the community, when our alumni hosts barbecues or Christmas parties, I get to hear from them and see that they are doing good work in our community. But locally, we also, the therapeutic courts, we work with a lot of different community organizations. And since I am part of the funding request for those, we also ask for funds to support our connection with those community organizations. So we ask for funds to support our treatment providers. We ask for funds to do other things like housing. In our community, I see Michelle's asking me to wrap it up. So in our community, we do work with Oxford International, Eagles Wings, Agape, and West Sound for housing. The need is often more than the beds available, but we're lucky because a lot of the rural communities surrounding us don't even have those options. And finally, I would like to stress the need for more mental health services. I know Kitsap Mental Health does a valiant job to try and keep up with the demands of those that need assistance from mental health. Mental health is an issue for a significant number of people suffering for mental health disorder or from substance use disorder. They have very few therapists and doctors. And so Kitsap Mental Health struggles to keep up with the demand, and it can sometimes take weeks to get an intake, let alone get an appointment. And by then, people get frustrated and they give up. So I think we need to focus on getting more therapists, our mental health and substance use disorder therapists, and more housing for our communities. Thank you. Sorry, Michelle, I took too long, didn't I? I see a lot.
All right.
You're fine.
Thank you. So if we can, if we have questions, we are getting down to the final moments here. If we can, type those questions in the chat. Hopefully, Judge, you can take a look at those. Same thing for the next two panels. I see Lennon is queued up. Lennon, let's go with you and Ty. We'll give you the last word.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can. Thank you.
Okay, good. So I got the question from Michelle. Well, thank you for inviting me. So I'm being a substance abuse counselor for the Spanish-speaking population for the last 15 years. So right now I work for Western State Hospital. I'm one of the IC3 institutional counselor level 3 there. So the first question, my biggest concern is the self-medication and also the abuse medication out there. I don't see a lot of conversation about that. The easy access to the medication. Let's see, for juveniles or any youth, they have access to grandpa medication and everybody's medication in the house. So you see that, and also the selling of the prescription medication industry, and also selling of different medication. So that's one of the biggest concerns right now as a counselor for substance abuse. With that, I'm just trying to speak really fast. I know you guys need to end this. With this, so we got the 60,000 homeless in the street, and we see here in Thurston County, Pierce County, and also King County. And the waiting list is 1.5 years. So very difficult for them to have access to treatment, access to shelter, because there's no bed. And I see when I was a counselor, the outreach counselor for Seattle, I see there is many of these individuals coming from different states. So you see people coming from Hawaii, with the ticket paying for the city of Hawaii to King County, because they actually was telling, the city in Hawaii told them that we have a lot of resources here. And also we have a lot of money, like Boeing, we have Microsoft. So, and it's very difficult for us to tackle this if we continue getting individuals from different part of the United States. and that include Latino population, that include a lot of individuals that crossing the border. And so another good question that Michelle sent me was about the security and the community. So right now, and I know I hear the fentanyl, but they're not talking about the mix with the psilocin, and that's the fentanyl with the horse tranquilizer, and this mix right now, that drug. And I know the expert in the field is recommending using the Narcan, even though when they know the Narcan probably doesn't work with psilocin because it's not obvious. And that's one of the biggest concerns. The last part that I want to mention is we do have a few different programs that's working. Like, for instance, we have the alcohol and drugs 24-hour helpline. We have the clearinghouse, but we don't have in different language. Like, for instance, if somebody from the Spanish population want to reach those lines after hour, it would be very difficult for them to communicate with somebody there. So this is something that we should need be better in order to help this population. And also for the last part is the treatment that we need. I agree with everybody in the panel about the mental health and also the substance abuse, and also be careful with when we let the people go, because we actually writing those discharge, but we don't making the proper referral for them to continue the aftercare. And that's something that I see in this field a lot. So we just finished the therapeutic intervention with these patients. We don't see them anymore when they supposed to continue with some of the aftercare recommendation, like a community support or sober support group, like AAA, CA, NA, so you name it. And that's what I have for this discussion today. Thank you, everybody. It was a very informative panel.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Lennon. And
Yeah,
so
you're
Ty, are you around? Oh, sorry, we are out of time.
We are at time, and I don't think Ty is on actually. So
Okay.
you can probably go to
Go ahead,
final
Michelle.
statements. Yeah, thank you, Blake. Thank you so much to every panelist that shared today. This was really engaging and informative. And if perhaps I should have made it a 3-hour meeting in hindsight, but thank you so much. I will communicate to the committee about next agenda items, as we didn't have time for that today. There will be review of the annual report at the next meeting with a lot of updates around 5536 implementation. I know there's a lot of curiosity around where things stand with that. If you have questions for any of the panelists that you did not get to ask today, please feel free to write those in the chat with the person it's directed to, and we'll do our best to communicate and see if we can get responses if folks have time for that after the meeting today. So that's time. We'll let you all go. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.